welcome back to the Stacked podcast. Today we have a phenomenal guest. His name is Tycho. Tycho, founder of Zest Protocol. First of all, welcome so much, Tycho, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Yeah, thanks very much. It's great to be here. So thanks for having me, and yeah, looking forward to chat about all things Bitcoin, crypto, and much more.
Likewise. We met in Nashville a couple of weeks back for the first time. We spoke for a bit. I got very curious about what you guys are building. We didn't have a chance to record anything live there, unfortunately. It was a bit hectic for everyone. But I think that will actually even be better now because now we have time. We actually can deep dive into a lot of the topics we want to discuss and we want to kind of bring to our viewers. So super excited to hear more about what you guys are doing at Zest Protocol, what you guys are doing, especially on stacks. Yeah, we'll dive into all of that. But maybe before we start, we'll start off with the classic question and dive straight into it. Tycho, tell me more about yourself. How did you end up in crypto? Why are you doing what you are doing today? What's the story behind the man?
Yeah, sure thing. I mean, yeah. So I guess still fairly young, and while I was I was still in high school, learned about Bitcoin for the first time. I mean, I'm from the Netherlands. You know, people are generally quite excited about new technologies or talking about them. So yeah, it was like always this sort of idea of like, oh, this Bitcoin thing, it could be digital gold or something like that, right? And that was like just interesting as a concept. And yeah, then afterwards I went to study. I studied history, and yeah, and while I was in my history degree, I was mainly focusing on like economic history and kind of stuff like that, right? And what are the economic drivers, right, below a lot of kind of world events, and the further back you go, like the least data you have, right? So there's like there's a lot of interesting stuff there. And basically, if you sort of actually like look a bit more deeply at history, you see that like these changes in like monetary regimes or how money works are like they're quite frequent, right? And they happen a lot. And these days, like they don't happen so much, or we sort of perceive that we're in this kind of static world that's sort of going to be the case, that's going to be the same for forever, right? And usually, right, when it comes to big historical developments, usually when the world is in that sort of place that seems very static, that's the moment when something is going to change, right? So yeah, I would say that sort of made me quite curious, and but yeah, and I'd also been playing around with software quite a bit, building small applications and stuff like that. I was working on a SaaS company with some friends that got funded and so on. So we went ahead and built that. Also, while in the meantime, like that was like 2017, right? ICOs were coming, like Ethereum was coming as like a programming layer, but there wasn't really so much you could build, right? There wasn't so much sort of in terms of applications you could do, right? You could sort of like promise an application and launch a token, or you could facilitate people launching tokens, but with ICO launchpads. But yeah, it wasn't really like very compelling. So yeah, we ended up building what turned into a SaaS product. It started as a volunteering platform, so a platform for people to find volunteering opportunities, and we turned that into like a SaaS solution for NGOs to manage their operations better. And then in like 2020, 2021, got the opportunity to exit from that company, Deep Mob, and yeah, then it was a very different world, right? It was COVID, a lot of these things that I've been thinking about for a long time were sort of playing out very, very quickly, and things got very excited in crypto, and specifically because DeFi kind of burst on the scene. All right, you all of a sudden saw these DeFi apps that were like having real users doing real things, like what people were doing before on centralized exchanges, doing it on chain and actually using smart contracts for the first time. And then it was like, that's probably the seed that's going to kick off a lot of innovation and a lot of things. And yeah, that's when I really dedicated myself to it.
Awesome. I think you're the first guy I meet that started off with history. I think a lot of people in crypto kind of have developed or have already had that like interest in like looking at history, economic history, to kind of learn from it um, and kind of see what we can implement, what we can do better, like going forward. I love how for you it's actually you started with history and you kind of noticed that you could actually apply this in a different industry as well. So history and kind of software in a way combined is what brought you in crypto. Now, from crypto itself to where you are now today with Zest, what's that journey been like? I have that as a question, but actually before that, like
Yeah.
very curious because you're also the first guy from the Netherlands I have on. How is the
Yeah.
general crypto scene in the Netherlands? Tell me more about that first before we go into the details.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think generally in the Netherlands, I think we probably have like, more crypto per per capita than in most places, right? It's probably not like, the epicenter of the crypto world in everywhere. But yeah, I would say like, I mean, Netherlands has a very strong tradition in trading, right? From the East India Company days, right? And also in market making and digital trading, right? So some of the largest market making firms in the world are based in Amsterdam, and they've embraced crypto, right? So, you see like the likes of like Flow Traders, IMC, etc., like doing quite a lot in the space. And that has also had some kind of spillover, right? So you had like some very prominent VC firms, right? Like M11, for example, in Amsterdam. And then generally, I think quite a lot of early adopters, right? A lot of people who bought crypto early on, right? Because a bit like me, right? They sort of, it came into their information system, right? And we were quite like Anglo-Saxon oriented, right? Consume a lot of that kind of English information, and quite open to new things and trying new things, right? And
And
quite independent.
entrepreneurial, right?
Yeah,
Entrepreneurial,
exactly.
I would say. The Netherlands, like, I mean, I'm Belgian, obviously, we're a close neighbor of yours, and I always found that you guys are like way more entrepreneurial in a way than the Belgians. And just many things you see that you walk through the Netherlands. I think there's a lot more entrepreneurial activity. You just see it on the street, like that business mindset or entrepreneurial mindset is kind of built in. So seems
Yeah.
like that helped you as well in your journey. That's good to hear. But yeah, tell me more about so from joining crypto in a way or kind of going into crypto to getting to Zest Protocol. How has that journey within crypto been for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I started so that DeFi, seeing Uniswap, Aave, that was sort of very much the catalyst for me being okay, like this is the window to building something serious, right? On with smart contracts for the first time. And yeah, I was also very curious. I started using all these applications, right, kind of towards the tail end of DeFi summer, right, moving money around on chain. And yeah, I mainly had most of my assets in BTC, right, in Bitcoin, because at the time, sort of, yeah, like specifically with all the money printing and so on, I thought, okay, that's like the most sort of sensible asset to own. And yeah, then I was trying to deploy BTC into DeFi and sort of realized like how kind of cumbersome it is, right? Like there was like back then the REN bridge, for example, like it's no longer around, but that was like one of the biggest projects to move BTC into REN BTC, and then you could swap it into WBTC and you could use it in all these places. Of course, WBTC, right? BTC custodied in BitGo, and then having a wrapped version of that on Ethereum. But then again, like you lose like this sort of the hardness of the assets, right? By sort of giving it away and getting a receipt, right? And yeah, there were like a few people doing experiments, right? Like Badger DAO, maybe, a lot of different things. But I was like, yeah, it's this is all not sort of quite it. But this is very interesting, right? Because this DeFi thing is very interesting. But as soon as you would explain to, say like an older banker or something, like, hey, there's this really exciting thing, right? In crypto, it's called decentralized finance, and it works like that and that. And they'd be like, wow, that's super cool. And then they would obviously assume it's with Bitcoin, right? But if you sort of then dig deeper, it's like, no, it's not with Bitcoin at all. It's like with Ethereum, and it's like, different tokens on there. And then you'd be like, oh, like, okay, that's a bit of a bummer, right? So yeah, I would say like the real sort of catalyst is to sort of bring DeFi to Bitcoin, right, or to bring Bitcoin closer to DeFi, or one of those two things. Like that
Yeah.
seems to be like the space where you can really do something like very big, right? And I was sort of looking around, like, okay, who is working on that, right, in 2021? Who is working on scaling Bitcoin or doing something with Bitcoin? And it was surprisingly like very few people, right? That was basically Lightning Labs, right? Like Lightning Network doing more stuff with Bitcoin. There was Rootstock, which is like this sort of EVM merge mined, side chain. And there was Stacks, right? And yeah, I had a friend who worked at the Stacks Foundation, also sort of looked very deeply into these sort of three things, and kind of came to the realization, yeah, like the people working on Stacks are like extremely smart, extremely accomplished. Probably the most accomplished people working on this kind of problem. I like their approach more than the Lightning approach, which is very sort of ideological. Bitcoin has to be for payments because that's sort of what we believe. It sort of takes very, very, yeah, it doesn't sort of go very first principles. So I was like, well, if someone is going to figure something big out here, it's probably going to come from this area, right? So that's sort of how I sort of got involved in the Stacks community. Did a bunch of stuff and ended up as one of the first hires at Trust Machines, which is the company where Munib, the founder of Stacks, is the CEO. And yeah, essentially started working on figuring out how we can make Stacks better suited for doing DeFi and doing Bitcoin DeFi specifically. And that was sort of like the journey into this.
Into Stacks, right? Got it. Just pausing right here, asking a few like other questions before I forget to ask them, and before we dive deeper into Zest itself. So if I get this correctly, you realized back in 2021 that wrapped BTC on Ethereum wasn't gonna do the job. What in terms of like what you needed, or any form of BTC like in a wrapped version that is kind of on another chain that is Bitcoin, it's not gonna work. You kind of call that in 2021. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, definitely.
Interesting.
Or no, it's not going to work, but it's not going to scale to a meaningful amount of Bitcoins, right? Yeah. Like wrapped Bitcoin is like 1%, 2% of BTC. That's like the most, risk loving 1 to 2%, but it won't be 10%, right? That you need something better to get to 10.
Got it. That's a very good call to have made, I think, back in the day. Like, I think now it's kind of obvious in a way, because even like we've had DeFi like go up and down, and like it's clear that like wrapped BTC itself also has issues, by the way, but wrapped BTC has not kind of sparked DeFi as much as we wanted to with BTC, the asset or a form of BTC, right? So kind of bringing the tech to the BTC chain itself, or BTC asset, like I think that's a super interesting vision to have had already in 2021. I see it now, but props for seeing that early on. While we're on this topic of BitGo and wrapped BTC, quick media take. What's your take on the most recent announcement of BitGo kind of decentralizing the wrapped BTC in a way?
Yeah, I would say I haven't looked too deeply into like all the exact details of which custodian it's moving to or which jurisdiction and how exactly that works. But I guess the sort of high level story that I know is that like WBTC for BitGo has started to become maybe more of a liability than an asset, right? It sort of attracts all this regulatory scrutiny, right? I think BitGo custody is like a few percent of all BTC in circulation. The custody business is kind of key. And this is sort of one thing they kind of did for the ecosystem, right? That they sort of had to do. But it's not necessarily like their prime business, and it would sort of never be, right? And I think that already in itself is like, really the setup for something new and big to come along. And I think if you would ask anyone at BitGo, they'd be like, yeah, sure. Like, build on top of this, like do something new, do something exciting. Like we're not the sort of chosen ones to, bring BTC to everywhere and like connect it to every single chain, right? We're sort of doing something in the meantime. And I think that like now suddenly became clear to a lot of people. And yeah, made a lot of people wonder, right? Like, what's next, and got a lot of people interested. Because before this announcement, a lot of people would say, well, WBTC is already won; it's the most liquid. How are you going to compete with it, etc. And the window is now much more open.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And I mean, in a way, I even saw, I think, Maker announcing that they're considering to stop accepting WBTC because of that. And I mean, I think the implications of this might be quite big, but then again, maybe Maker might also realize maybe they should have just see how they can actually get onto Bitcoin itself, or they figure out like by then they'll be competing with protocols that actually have chosen that path like from the get-go, which I think is what you guys kind of do at Zest, right? But yeah, I think let's segue into Zest.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've been in 15 minutes. We haven't even talked about Zest, but
Yeah. No,
that's a good thing.
that's right.
Tell me more. So what is
Yeah.
Zest? How does it differentiate from other products in the ecosystem, within Bitcoin ecosystem, or even without, like existing protocols
Yeah.
as we know it?
Absolutely. So Zest Protocol is it's a lending protocol built for Bitcoin, right? And it's very much based on that. That's a story we were going through, right? In 2021, like, DeFi is exciting. You really want to borrow against your BTC, right? That's like the main thing I was trying to do, was trying to get my BTC into all these kind of derivatives to like borrow against it and then do stuff. So yeah, when starting to work on stacks, that was like, okay, we need to sort of get stacks to a state where you can do lending against BTC or generate BTC yields, right? That's like the perfect end state, and I would want to build that. So that's essentially what Zest Protocol is. So yeah, bringing that experience on chain of borrowing against BTC within one single Bitcoin transaction. We get a thumbs up here. Borrowing against BTC within a single Bitcoin transaction, or generating yield on BTC also with a single Bitcoin transaction, right? And essentially bringing that experience that people had on CeFi platforms, right, where you could you open a BTC balance and from there on you borrow against it, you earn yield on it, to bring that on DeFi rails where it's fully transparent what's happening under the hood, and yeah, essentially it can be a much better risk reward that no human can interfere with, right? So that's very much the gist of what we're working on.
Got it. And you guys chose stacks. I mean, now that I know your history, that obviously makes sense. Um, Tell me from a product perspective, if let's say you wouldn't have worked at stacks, does this still make sense? Like, what's the reason for choosing stacks in the first place, outside of the fact that you obviously know it very well? You're like you've
Yeah,
contributed so much to it, right?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So essentially, if you want to build something like this, right? If you want to create a borrowing lending experience against BTC or with BTC, like the first thing that you need is you need to move that BTC to a more programmable environment, right? So something like a L2. That's kind of like the first step. And then if you do that, you need to sort of, you would want that BTC to live on the sort of the most fast, secure, best place, right? Which WBTC from BitGo is not, right? It's not the sort of the best way to do it, or at least it creates a lot of risk, and then because of that risk, not a lot of people see the risk reward, and then you end up with not all the Bitcoins. So thinking about it like that, right? The approach for Stacks is very interesting, right? So Stacks itself has read access to Bitcoin state. The chain is very closely anchored to Bitcoin, to the extent where after every Bitcoin block, like Stacks state essentially becomes unforkable, right? So you have like a very very close relationship with Bitcoin security. And then while I was working on Stacks, I basically spent almost all my time on building something called sBTC, right, which is now going to launch in a couple of months. And essentially what sBTC is that people can move BTC onto the Stacks layer in the cheapest, fast, and best way. Or one, it's cheap because it has no wrapping fees, right? Because all the Stacks validators, they are securing the peg. It's very fast because Stacks is so closely anchored to Bitcoin. You can allow this to happen within one confirmation, right? Because Bitcoin can't fork away without Stacks forking away. So because of that, you don't have like that sort of wait time that you have with, say, a TBTC or something like that. And then it's better because you have that Bitcoin finality on the chain, right? And if you can move, then if you move your BTC to another layer, then it unlocks all the possibilities, right? To do lending and to do yield generating activity, right? So essentially, building that sBTC or building sBTC, like I very much worked on that with the idea in mind of like, okay, you'd want to create a really compelling lending experience for users, and where that's going to go is that essentially, we will have an app, Zest Protocol, where people can come, they can send BTC, open a position, and generate yields or borrow against it, right? Just like on CeFi, and that's essential with stacks powering that under the hood, and so that's like very much the kind of the symbiosis of like how the stacks upgrade makes that kind of experience possible.
If I understand correctly, like you kind of chose stacks for the different kind of security guarantees it comes with when it comes to kind of bringing native BTC actually to the stacks ecosystem in a form which is sBTC in this case. So it's mostly like using those assumptions or decentralization, I would assume as well, like with the stacks validator set kind of guaranteeing that it's decentralized properly. Is there also that kind of guarantee that, let's say stacks go down for whatever reason, can users on the Bitcoin like mainnet layer still kind of withdraw their assets? Let's say for whatever reason, like stacks goes down, is that still possible?
No, that's not currently possible with any kind of Bitcoin scaling solution, unless the Lightning Network, right? So that would require like a full like upgrade to Bitcoin or something like that. But what is the case is that essentially, as long as there is 70% of the validators on stacks are honest, then people can move out their assets, and every Bitcoin block, the previous state becomes unforkable. So essentially, the question becomes like, when do you have stack security, right? Like when is the security of your assets dependent on the stacks network and not on the Bitcoin network? Well, it's just that time in between each Bitcoin block.
Got it. That's
sense. Kind of what it boils down to.
Yeah, got it. And so let's say if I'm a user now, like I have assumed sBTC, I kind of come to Zest Protocol, I open my position there. And between the time that I open my position and the actual next Bitcoin block is mine, so I take, in a way, a slightly bigger risk than until after that block is mine. What's the worst case that can happen? Let's talk like worst case. What can happen? Just curious.
Yeah. So what are the risks, right? What are the risks of like deploying your BTC on Zest Protocol? And by the way, like we are still in the run up towards the sBTC upgrade. So right now you can't yet deploy BTC on Zest Protocol. We have a money market for stacks assets right now, right? Where people deploy STX and stuff like that. But when people deploy BTC, right? Like what is the risk profile, right? So of course, I mean, number one, right? Like Bitcoin security, right? That's of course like something you're relying on. Two, it's the consensus amongst the stacks validators, right? So to move the underlying BTC that backs sBTC, there needs to be a 70% quorum, so 70 of validators. And so that's like a risk, or that's like something, that's a risk that you're taking.
I would say that's reasonable, right? Like, I mean, 7 out of 10. I'm not sure how big the validator said, how well decentralized.
Yeah, it's not 7 out of 10. It's weighted, right? So it's like weighted by the amount of STX. So I guess the amount of STX that's currently staked is it's like close to $1 billion, right? So it's like $700 million of economic security.
So it's similar like a delegated proof of stake type of mechanism where it kind of depends on the amount of delegated stacks tokens.
Yep. That's right.
Got it.
That's right. So it's a weighted.
So that's
weighted threshold. Yeah. And but if you look in practice, right, like who are the validators that have this stake? I mean, you're essentially looking at Block Daemon, Figment, so on and so forth, right? So like the kind of the leading staking providers, right? And so that's on the stack security. Then of course you're deploying your BTC in a smart contract, right? Which means that there's smart contract risk. On stacks, there's a very interesting smart contract language called Clarity, which is essentially probably the most secure or robust like smart contract language that exists. Yeah, it's not Turing complete. It's open source by default. Of course, the ecosystem around it is still, smaller. So there are there are things to sort of iron out there. But yeah, essentially a highly secure smart contract environment that's very suited to something like holding BTC, right? So that's then the third risk that you're taking, and then after that it's obviously like what you then do with the BTC, right? So you could get liquidated. You could send it to the wrong address, things like that, right?
Yeah, got it. Let's talk a bit more about. I mean, you mentioned borrowing against it, and you mentioned like yield generating Bitcoin as well. Are you saying here this yield is coming from the actual borrowing lending protocol, and it's actually that is yield that comes from users that are willing to pay for borrowing assets in a way, the interest that is that where the yield comes from?
So we essentially have kind of, I would say you can kind of see them as two pillars, right? So there's Zest Protocol Borrow, that's like borrowing against assets, that'll be borrowing against BTC. And their users can choose, not have this BTC rehypothecated, right? So it will just stay there. That's Zest Protocol Borrow. Then the yield generating part is Zest Protocol Earn, which is, to some extent a separate product, even though it uses like the same underlying infrastructure. And there basically users will have an option to choose between different kind of yield generating activities, right? And just on the whole, like if you think about BTC and generating yield on BTC, there's three ways you could generate yield on BTC, right? There's of course lending, right? So it's lending out BTC to generate yield, right? Market makers often borrow BTC to do trading and stuff like that. So that's one. The other one is options, right? So that's like, certain option strategies, covered calls, more complex versions of that. And then the third one that will launch very soon is, or maybe that's launched already by the time that we're talking, is staking.
Staking, yeah.
Right, staking BTC with Babylon and like the staking protocol, and there will probably be many more, right?
Yeah.
And those are kind of like the options we'd want to, we're presenting to users under Zest Protocol Earn, where essentially they can there's different choice between different kind of risk parameters,
risk
or what they're comfortable with.
Appetite.
What they're comfortable with, always sort of secured by the stack smart contract language, sBTC, right? And that's sort of very deep security stack that's kind of behind it.
Got it. So within Zest, you'll have these multiple options to actually generate yield. So it won't be just one option. You'll actually have multiple options, from what I understand. That's interesting. Obviously, would speak to I think a wide amount of users. I would say it's like a wide target audience. To be honest, I think it is the main use case in DeFi for me. It's like putting an asset somewhere, borrowing against it, leverage up in a way. I think if you want to, depends on how degen you are and how risk taking or how big your risk appetite is. Do you also expect that to be like a very big driver of demand, like the kind of looping of like you put an asset somewhere, you borrow against it, you buy more of that, like you kind of loop in to kind of generate more and more yield. Is that what you see as a main driver as well?
I would say maybe not as much, right? I mean, looping is essentially some sort of arbitrage strategy, right? Like there's sort of, there's like some kind of yield arbitrage probably that can be made. And that will probably most likely be arbed away very, very fast, right? If a chain has adoption. So, so I would say that probably we would really focus that, on the sort of user segment that's coming to for real utility, right? That's coming to borrow against the BTC, that's coming to generate yield in as safe ways as possible, right? And
actually, Actually, so to actually go back the question, would users be able to deposit their yield-bearing assets to borrow against?
Yeah,
That's
that's currently already possible. So we have
right.
a lending market open right now on the Stacks L2, right? And people deposit staked STX there, for example, right?
Okay.
And which is from Stacking DAO, which is very similar to
Yeah.
Lido staked ETH, but then for Stacks, right? People borrow against that all the time.
Yeah. Got it. Got it. And with BTC versions or yield-bearing versions of BTC, that will also be the case.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's of course, sBTC will be like, very key,
Yeah.
piece to that puzzle. There, there are no yield bearing BTCs announced yet that will be on
Yeah.
stacks, but yeah, there'll be some news there very soon. So I can
Cool.
already share that.
I did I read that correctly that for stacks there's a pretty big upgrade coming, and I believe you guys are also depending on something. Does that has like is that what you're referring to? Like for sBTC, that's
Yeah,
depending on this Nakamoto upgrade.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I
Can
can
you
give a
tell a bit
super
more about
quick
that?
rundown of it.
Yeah,
So
please.
essentially, stacks launched in January of 2021, right? And that's still the chain that we have today, right? Not really like one tiny update was made to it. Instead, everyone is focused on, or all the core development resources have been focused on this next version of Stacks, which includes sBTC and the Stacks Nakamoto upgrade. So what that does is basically, so the Stacks Nakamoto upgrade comes first. It's going to start on the 28th of August, and it's going to be completed somewhere towards the end of September. And it introduces validation to Stacks, which, long story short, makes blocks very fast. Right now, blocks on Stacks are as fast as Bitcoin blocks. That's going to make blocks on Stacks about 5 seconds, right? Because there's validation, so there can be blocks in between
Yeah.
Bitcoin blocks.
Hmm.
And then once that validation is introduced, then sBTC can be slapped on top, which essentially, people can move BTC to the Stacks layer, and their BTC is held in a wallet that's controlled by all these validators, right? Or
Hmm.
signers, as we call them on Stacks.
Yeah.
And that's being rolled out sort of as a fast follow. But this is about like three years of work, right? That's all coming out in the coming couple of months. And yeah, basically, bringing it to feature parity with an Ethereum
Oh
L2.
wow. Okay. I was not aware that it was like so many months and years of development kind of going into one upgrade. That's quite a challenge. So the upgrade takes multiple weeks, you say?
Yeah, so essentially on Stacks there are these sort of cycles like epochs, right?
Yeah.
For staking. So it's gonna get activated around the 28th of August. And then, this 2 week cycle needs to pass, then like one other piece can be added in, and that 2 weeks need to pass, and then boom, fast blocks can be activated.
Awesome, awesome. I mean, I obviously love the concept. I love that you guys are also taking the hard route in a way by, I think, building on a protocol or on an L2 like Stacks. There's a lot of alternatives available, right? Like you could more easily, I would assume, create a Bitcoin lending protocol on an alternative L2 that has, like, let's say, the EVM, for example. Um, what would you say is like your main reason for not going that route?
Yeah, I would say that we haven't seen yet today like another or a Bitcoin L2 that's not Stacks, where we can build a really compelling product for users, right? If I just look at my own behavior, sure, to borrow against BTC, yeah, I still use Aave, right? And I'm a very happy user of Aave. And even though there have been so many markets launching on other L2s, like I would not necessarily be, I'm not a user there. And then the question kind of is, well, like why is that, right? And I would say that, yeah, to really build a compelling product, like you need the chain needs to be very closely anchored to Bitcoin, right? You'd want to create that experience where people just send BTC to the app, right? And within one block, it opens a balance. For that, you'd need like that close
Right.
anchoring to Bitcoin. You'd need something like sBTC, right? And you'd want to use like a decentralized, like, pegged BTC like sBTC, right? And currently on a lot of the other L2s out there, like, one or all of those pieces are not entirely there, and you're just doing something that you could already do on Ethereum as a user. Now, of course, that might change, right? That's of course like the promise, right? They're like saying, well, we're going this other approach, right? Like you're going sort of this approach, and we're kind of going this other approach of like just sort of taking what was there before and then like bringing it in, which is which is also very valuable to have in the ecosystem and the space. But yeah, I would say that to really create like a really compelling, secure lending experience with BTC, you need some of those features that are very hard to replicate with an EVM environment.
Yeah. No, I understand that. Let's maybe, start rounding up a little bit, and in terms of like what all of this now means to the end user who's kind of holding onto his BTC, who's dying to start using Zest Protocol, borrow against his BTC, get some yield. What are kind of the timelines? What are the next steps? Are there any kind of incentives there? How does it work? Like I would say, like, let's say the next.
Yeah, absolutely. So right now, if you come to zestprotocol.com and launch the app, you'll find the lending market on the stacks layer, right? So if you have idle STX, idle staked STX, stablecoins on stacks, you can all deploy that. And there's a point system running for the stacks market. And yeah, I think points are a really great way to measure community involvement right ahead of decentralizing a protocol. So yeah, that's currently what's currently there. Then when it comes to the launch of Zest Protocol Earn, we haven't set like an exact timeline on that, but yeah, it will coincide with the sBTC launch on stacks. And there's one the first BTC yielding strategy that we can already open before then, right? So there's like there'll be sort of a pre sBTC period, right? When people can start earning yield on their BTC and start let the Bitcoin start flowing in. And yeah, so sBTC is currently scheduled to be launched in October, and then in September we will likely start with the first inflows of BTC on Zest Protocol.
How big do you see this getting? So you mentioned like wrap BTC, like 1%, maybe a little bit more of the total BTC supply kind of in use in DeFi, right? Like what's your prediction? Let's say 12. Let's say we call again next year. We call you up and ask like what's the status of BTC being active in DeFi, whether it's in Zest or even bigger, right? What's your prediction?
Yeah, I think it's very much, I think of it a bit as like an adoption curve, right? You have like this kind of bell curve, and there are people who are very early, there are people who are sort of very late. I think, WBTC or, BTC on Ethereum in general, it sort of speaks to that very long tail early adopter of the adoption curve, right? Like people like me, right? Like 1% of all Bitcoins in circulation, maybe 2, something like that, right? That's sort of where that sits. I would say really the next step is unlocking that first leg up of the curve, which is maybe like, call it like 12%, right? I think that can be done with Bitcoin L2s, right? Like specifically, with stacks leading the charge there, with sBTC, with sort of, decentralized systems to move BTC to a programmable environment that are secured by Bitcoin as much as possible, right? Or come very close. I think that will like lead to sort of like 10, 12%, something like that. Then to really go like further, to go like 50% or more. For that, like I think something will be needed where a Bitcoin L2 can actually reach like full feature parity with an Ethereum L2, whereby what you mentioned earlier, right, that when let's say a chain goes away and the validators disappear of an L2, that people can still withdraw their assets, right? And that would need like an opcode upgrade on Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And like essentially, like I almost call it like sort of SegWit v3, right? If you think of it like that, because it's just like about being able to verify more data of something that happened outside of Bitcoin and changing balances on the basis. That's like opcat. Like people are talking a lot about these things, but this will take like 5 years or so, right? So for now, we can focus on going from that 1% to that 12. And then, the clouds will be there and it will be clear to the Bitcoin community, most likely, or that's at least our job to make it clear, that's like the future of
Got
Bitcoin.
it. That's a noble mission to be on for sure. Um, last question, maybe. Do you think we'll ever see the time where you can actually deploy the borrowing lending protocol straight onto the Bitcoin L1? Like, will Bitcoin change enough for that, or should it not?
No, I don't think it should. I don't think it should, and it's definitely not going to. So, so yeah. No, I think the beauty is a bit of like, of Bitcoin is like, you know, mm, yeah, and I think this sort of comes back a bit to where we started with this whole history thing, right? But like, if you just think about it, like to add programmability to money should be much easier than turning programmability into money, right? And Bitcoin is money, right? Like people see it as that. People see it as an asset. Like it's in a completely different league from anything else. And then to add programmability to that is like a technical challenge, right? That can be taken on. To start the programmability and then be like, well, this actually needs to become held as money, right? Or like it needs to sort of get that reputation. Like that's not something you can engineer, right? It's
Mm,
impossible. And in that sense, like I think that it's very important to sort of separate the money part from the programmability part. Because in that sense, you can sort of separate the social consensus that exists around the world
mm.
that Bitcoin is a real asset from the experimentation and sort of
Programmability.
trying to make it into something.
Yeah, yeah. No, that makes sense. I mean, I think we'll see how it plays out. I think there's people believing other things. I haven't made up my mind yet on like where to position myself, but I'm excited to see all of this. Like, I think this is huge. Uh, Look, this has been super educational. I've learned a lot about Zest Protocol, about Stacks itself, about history. Um, I'm gonna follow this more closely. I'll follow you. Where do others follow you? Tell me, like, how do we follow you, the protocol, what you guys are up to?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I'm on Twitter or X at Tyco Onnasch, but I think if you as Tyco.btc
I'll
as well, maybe that's the
put it
easiest
in
way
the
to find
notes.
me.
Yeah.
Tycho.btc. And Zest Protocol is there as well. So at Zest Protocol on Twitter, and then yeah, from there you can find out more about signing up for the early access for the BTC products as well as deploying assets on stacks.
Awesome. Any live events where people can catch you, talk more?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be speaking at Korea Blockchain Week at the start of September, and then we'll also be at Token 2049 in Singapore, and then after that, most likely wherever the conference train goes next.
Awesome, awesome. We'll be looking forward to seeing you there as well. Like I will be there as well. Actually,
Amazing.
one quick idea here that I have is, I mean, you're the first I pitched this to. Is want to do a sort of side series with Stacked where we do. It's called Stacked Elevator. Um, Basically, I give you the chance to give me a 30-second, 40-second elevator pitch on your product. Thinking to do it live in Korea. So if you want to prepare for that, if you're
Yeah,
keen to do that, we can do that and record it live
yeah,
there.
yeah. Let me know. Would be happy to do so.
Would be awesome. I think that could be interesting. Just for people to come and look. I want to see 10 different projects, their elevator pitch in like 30 seconds each. I think that's kind of a cool idea. Thinking about it, so we can make that happen in Korea. Awesome, cool. Thanks again so much, Tycho, for joining today. This has been great. Wish you a pleasant day further, and yeah, hope to see you soon. Cheers,
Likewise,
man. Thank
likewise.
you.
It was a great one.
Thank
Thank
you
you very
so
much.
much. Ciao.